welcome to Your Joyous Life. That's our theme for the year. And the second Sunday of this brand new year, I'm very, very happy that you're here with me. I see some new faces. I'm very glad to see you. I'm the spiritual leader of this community. My name is Reverend Karyl Huntley. That's my title and my name. My first name isn't Reverend, is it? Something I added. So this is our new year, your joyous year, and I want to draw your attention to this wonderful altar that Sandra Aguerrebere made for us with the bluebirds of happiness. How sweet is that? So we are building on everything that we did last year. Last year, we had a big, long year of studying the philosophy of science of mind in the 12 statements that make up the What We Believe essay. It's kind of the very beginning, it's the beginning, the middle, and the end of what we believe. And we studied it all year long, and somehow at the end of the year, we just got real, real happy. And so I decided, along with some input, that I wanted to enhance that, to stand on what we had accomplished last year and to increase it. So if you are on board, whatever your joy level is, it's going to increase this year. And so just get ready to increase your bliss tolerance because it's going to go up. So we have a book that we're going to be working with all year long. It's called The Happiness Project. We still have a few copies in the bookstore, and we have more on order. So what we do is that we provide some in-home book study groups, if you'd like to join them. And we have a sign-up sheet at the back of the room there for people who would like to host. Now, what involves in hosting is simply to put the tea water on and put the chairs in a circle. That's all you have to do, because I'll provide the curriculum, and the book actually provides the curriculum for the year. And it's divided into 12 months, and the first month, January, is all about vitality and energy. And so this is a very hands-on, logical book with some to-dos that make a lot of sense. And I am going to add the spiritual truth behind that, because what I've found in my years in the ministry is that if something works, if something adds to life and consistently adds to life, there is a spiritual principle involved, whether we know it or not. So the spiritual principle for January is this up on the screen right now, and that is that energy is the activity of God. The activity of God is unending, just like every single aspect of God. It is infinite, immortal. There is all the energy that you could need and more. I mean, when you look out and see those little star nurseries where stars are being born and galaxies are, being formed, let me tell you, there's plenty of energy, and there is plenty of energy for each one of us. It is built into the intelligence of every single cell in our body. Our cells glow with energy when you look at them under a microscope. And so that is the activity of God that is in full force if we don't shut it down. And so this year we are, especially beginning in January, we are learning how to let it go. I won't break into that song from Frozen, but I could. So some of the to-dos for January are: go to sleep earlier, exercise better, toss, restore, and organize, tackle a nagging task, and act more energetic. So I've already heard some stories from some of you about how you are incorporating these to-dos, and that's what I want all year long. I want your stories. So I'm going to tell a story today on Ed Dudkowski. So Ed finished a task this week for you that has been in his to-do box for over 2 years. that is also at the back table. He has created CDs for the major events that we have done for the past 5 years. And they're ready for you to purchase, $20 a piece. They are ready to go. I mean, they're DVDs, right? Yeah, DVDs. So that has been something that has hung over. Where is Ed? Oh, there. Stand up, Ed. So do you have more energy? Are you happier? Oh, good. You're the poster child for the theme. So our goal this month is to boost our energy and see if that does not add to our happiness. So we started all this last week. And last week I sort of laid out the whole theme. And I wanted everyone to get kind of joyful about being joyful. You know, to kind of rope in this theme and think it's okay for you. And because there was something in me that had joy as kind of spiritual light, you know, kind of when there's all this going on in the world, to just be joyful. I kind of had to work through my own arguments, coming to the conclusion that yes, the expression of this gift of life that we have is very well appreciated through living in joy. That's what we came to last week, and I wondered if I was the only one that had these little doubts about, is joy really important enough to put a whole year's work on it? Well, several of you shared with me after the service last week, and something along these lines. I grew up with a depressed parent, or I grew up with an alcoholic parent. I grew up with a sick parent that made me feel guilty for being so joyful. It was kind of like, how selfish are you to be so joyful when I am so miserable? Well, you know what? That gave me the agreement that this is extremely important for us to look at this year. And actually, as I said that right now, I got some nods from the audience. So there's a concept that actually has to do with the Christmas story. We're not too far from Christmas. And it's called the Herod factor. Now, Herod, in the story of the Christ child, was an officiant of Rome who was afraid of the prophecy that the Messiah had been born. And so he ordered the execution of all boy children under the age of 2 in Galilee, in the whole area at the end of the Mediterranean Sea. So this comes from Gene Houston's book called God's Seed, which is an entire, makes the story of Jesus' life into a metaphor of your life. And so in it, she, of course, deals with the Herod factor. So here, I'm going to read a paragraph. I have frequently noticed in families, even very loving families, that when a certain child, often under the age of 2, shows too much joy or exuberance, a Herod rises in one of the parents or the brothers or sisters and attempts a kind of unconscious violence. This Herod factor runs very deep. For example, when I was 4 or 5 years old, and my own little brother was a tiny baby, I couldn't believe his laughter and exuberance. I knew how hard it was out there in the world. How could he be so full of innocent laughter? And just for a second, I felt impelled to twist his arm. Nobody would know. And then I stopped. I didn't twist his arm, but the impetus was there. And I've always remembered it with shock and horror, that this sort of impetus familiar to you? It's called the Herod factor. And so the Herod factor is that within all of us that says, you know, how come you're so happy when I'm not so happy? I'm going to see what I can do about that. And so that's the reason that we commiserate with miserable people. And that when we have those conversations where somebody awfulizes, and then we try to top them. Because we are in that mode of agreeing that life is difficult. So we seek support for that in our lives, and that was the pushback that I was getting with the agreement that I was getting with the theme of you can be as joyful as you possibly can conceive of. But the other piece of pushback was people saying, well, I feel kind of upset that you think I should be happier than I am. So one person was feeling bad because they were happy. Another person was feeling bad because they weren't happy. And so the feeling was, I ought to be something different. And so the title for this talk is Exploring the Ought and Should Dilemma. So here you have this little thinker dude, and the little devil in one ear and the little angel in the other ear saying what they should do. And the dilemma is that often the shoulds are opposing. So what are we supposed to do? So the inspiration for this talk came in one paragraph from the January chapter in this book. So I'm going to read that to you, or I'm going to read half a paragraph to you. This is in the section of Toss, Restore, and Organize. We recently moved, and beforehand, I was panicking at the thought of everything that needed to be done. What moving company should we use? Where should we buy boxes? How would our furniture fit into our new apartment building and the tiny service elevator? I was paralyzed. My mother had her usual matter-of-fact, unruffled attitude, and she reminded me that I should do what I knew I ought to do. There it is, should and ought in the same sentence. I should do what I knew I ought to do. So I don't know about you, but when I get too many shoulds, I get to feeling like this. You are not the boss of me, and I will do the opposite of what I ought to do. So I hear some of you out there too, that when you get too many shoulds in your face, you just want to revolt. And whether it's good for me or not, I'm not going to do it. Because we have been programmed that ought and should leads to guilt and control and all of these things that we do not want to feel because we want to be free, and so we're not going to do what we ought to do. But then we have something like this from our spiritual teaching, from Emma Curtis Hopkins, who said, there is good for me and I ought to have it. So you have an ought from a limited perspective, you ought to know better, and you have an ought from an empowering perspective, there is good for me and I ought to have it. And there's the dilemma again. An ought and another ought that is sort of in opposition. We ought to do our job, and we ought to accept our good. So let me just take a step back and offer what may be a new perspective to you, that we live in a universe of rules. We live in a universe of rules. They come down to us not as rules, but they come down to us as natural laws and spiritual laws. This is the way the universe works. This is the way this realm works. Here's one, that it's better for you to let gravity pull you down the mountain if you're skiing, rather than muscle around the turns, because you will tire yourself, you will hurt yourself, and you will fall down. That's what you do when you learn to ski, is you let the natural law of gravity work for you. Can you work against it? Yes. And you're going to hurt yourself. Here's another one. There are natural laws involving electricity. You probably shouldn't dry your hair in the bathtub because of the way electricity works. It's a natural law that water is a conduit of electricity, and you will electrocute yourself. Can you dry your hair in the bathtub? Yes. And it won't work well for you. So you can say, don't be the boss of me. I am going to dry my hair in the bathtub. No, it's not going to be good for you because you are going against the natural laws. So there are spiritual laws that work also. Can we go against the spiritual laws? Of course. We do. And it doesn't go well for us. So all of last year, we talked about the natural or the spiritual laws that we teach in this philosophy. And if you come a little bit early next week, you can see them. You can see all 12 of them up on the show that goes before the service. But I want to go back even further to some rules that we have rebelled against. I'm sure you all remember the 10 Commandments. How many of you have said, don't be the boss of me, with some of these 10 Commandments, right? Okay. This is going to be good. Okay, don't worry. I'm not going to go, Old Testament on you too much. But you can interpret the 10 Commandments as God being the boss, and I don't want him to be the boss of me, and so I'm going to make my own choices about whether I follow the 10 Commandments. Or you can look deeper and you can say, there are some spiritual laws here that if I follow the spiritual laws, it will go better for me. Let's look at a few. The first one is, thou shalt have no other gods before me. This is not about God's ego saying, I am the king of the hill and you are going to worship me. No. The teaching is, the spiritual law is that there is one source, there is one life, there is one power, and that power is God. If we recognize this, if we work within it, if we know that our life is God's life and the power that we use is God's power, then things go better for us. Having no other gods before me means my ego does not get in the way of this spiritual law. My need for recognition that satisfies some egoic thing in me is that I'm so important that will not go well with me. If I only want to accumulate wealth so I have power, that will not go well with me. If I know that the power that I'm using is God's power and the life that is living in me is God's life, then I have no other God before God because there's only one God. That's the spiritual principle. You can live that and it will go well with you. Or you can choose not to, and it won't go so well. Here's another one. Commandment number 3. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. This is not about cursing. This is not about, your favorite swear word and my favorite swear word. The name of God is I am. That is the name of God. That is what in this whole Moses story was told to us. I am that I am is the name of God. If you take I am in vain, and if you put something on the end of that, like I am stupid, or I am limited, or I am unworthy, I am uninspired, that is taking the name of the Lord in vain. And it will not go well with you. If, however, you use the name of God to empower yourself and others with that real power of God that was in the first commandment. I am unlimited. I am the representative of God on earth. I am perfect, whole, and complete as the life within me is. Things will go well with you. You can choose either one. Okay? Commandment number 6. Thou shalt not kill. Well, I think every single spiritual tradition says that it is not good to separate a soul from their body and send a soul into the next realm without them having a conscious choice about it. And every spiritual tradition does. But let's look at the spiritual principle that underlies this. The spiritual law is that the intended expression of life is to be encouraged, not diminished. That, because you can kill a spirit with that whole Herod factor that we talked about. So the spiritual principle is the life that exists is meant to be encouraged to fulfill its true purpose. That's what you do in relationships if they're going well. That's what we do in this spiritual community if it's going well. If it's not going well, we are killing the spirit of each other, and it will not go well with us. Once again, your choice. And the last one we'll do is number 9. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Now, once again, this is not about being nice to the people around you. It is that there is a truth that we all live, if it's working for us, if we are working the natural law. The spiritual law is that if you lie, exaggerate, distort, or gossip, you are putting negative energy into the world that will absolutely come back and bite you. That's the spiritual law. You can lie. We all do. And you know what? I get caught every time, and it doesn't go well with me. So that's what we're looking at here. And when we put this into context with there is good for me and I ought to have it, you ought to have it. And we have all kinds of guideposts about how you can get it. And how you get it is to conform to the natural laws and the spiritual laws of the realm in which you have incarnated. Simple as that. Still, your choice. Does this make sense to you? Yeah. Good. So let's come back to joy. Is there a spiritual law about joy? Should we be joyful? And it actually seems that there is a spiritual law about joy. And I'm going to read, this is a little bit more challenging language-wise because it's from Thomas Troward, The Creative Process and the Individual. But this chapter is about the self-contemplation of spirit. And to make a long story short, the self-contemplation of spirit is how we all got here. God pondered, and we are the outcome. God thought upon itself and wanted playmates, essentially. And so created us, who are in some ways the polar opposites of God, in some ways exactly the same. We are in form, God is in spirit, and so we have a dimension to us that gives God more experience than if God simply remained in the spirit formless. Here's the piece from Troward. The conception of the creative order may therefore be generalized as follows. The spirit wants to enjoy the reality of its own life, not merely to vegetate, but to enjoy living. And therefore, by self-contemplation, it projects a polar opposite or complementary, calculated to give rise to the particular sort of relation out of which enjoyment of a certain mode of self-consciousness will necessarily spring. What that means is God created us so that God could experience what we can experience in this earth suit, on this earthly plane. So then he says, let this sentence be well pondered over until the full extent of its significance is grasped, for it is the key to the whole matter. So then, very well then, he says, right, very well, enough contemplation. Very well, spirit wants to enjoy life, and so by thinking of itself as having the enjoyment which it wishes, it produces the conditions which, by their reaction upon itself, give rise to the reality of the sort of enjoyment contemplated. So, that's on page, I lost it. You can find it again. But you get the meaning there. God contemplated itself and wanted to experience joy, and so created us. And so when we experience the joy that God wants to experience, God's pretty happy with that. It's one of those things that works. And so I thought that this explained even deeper that statement by Jesus that I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly, that your joy might be full. Now, last week we talked about that statement as us. Our joy might be full when we live life to the fullest. That's true. But also, Jesus came, that means all of us came, that God's joy might be full. Oh, isn't that beautiful? So, moving a little bit into last year with these spiritual principles, just want to mention two of them because they relate exactly. We believe that heaven is within and that we experience it to the degree that we become conscious of it. Now, we certainly imagine that heaven, the joy is an aspect of heaven. And so as we become conscious of that joy, we experience more of it, and we fulfill one of the purposes of living, which is to, give God a high and be joyful in the process. The very next one also applies. We believe the ultimate goal of life to be a complete emancipation from all discord of every nature, and that this goal is sure to be attained by all. When we let go of discord of every nature, what is left is joy. So, in this dilemma of should and ought, there are some things that you can do. Any should or ought that makes you feel angry and diminished and full of conflict, that's one to let go of. And then those shoulds that really point to a spiritual law, bite the bullet and say, yep, I am living by that one. So in conclusion, we check in with the Herod factor again. And if we find that there is something that we feel that someone else has an opinion about our joy level, if we react with anger, if we react with resentment, if we react with that rebellious thing, you're not the boss of me, the spiritual law that you are going against is we're all one. We are all one. You cannot put somebody else out of your heart and have it go well with you. So rather, when there is that impoverished dear one out there that doesn't understand spiritual principle, the inclusion of that person, just including them in your joyous heart, don't debate, just include. That refers back to what we talked about last week, which is making joy the most inclusive of all spiritual aspects, spiritual qualities. Now, we're almost to the end of the talk part, but the thing that we have different this year is going deeper. So this was a heady talk today. This was a big, heady talk. And you can sit with it, and you can feel the truth of it, and it will live in you in whatever way it does. Or you can take this lesson and go deeper with it. So here's the go deeper part if you would like to do it. So, you make a list of your shoulds. All the shoulds that you have yapping, because if your mother is not alive, she still lives in your head. So, you make a list of all the shoulds, and then you divide them into two categories. First is you divide them, the ones that make you feel unhappy, you reject them. I reject those because they lead to unhappiness, to conflict, to comparison, to guilt, to all of those things that you know how to feel and don't like to feel. Just get rid of those shoulds. But then accept the ones that reflect the nature of the universe. So you actually do a bit of work based on this talk. And you look at through your childhood and all those things, those lessons that made your back go up. And it's not so easy to look at and discern. That's why it's going deeper. Is it really one that is diminishing and I need to let go of? Or is it really one that plays on natural and spiritual laws and things would go better with me if I acted in that direction? So, good work. I didn't see anybody's eyeballs roll up in their head. So, blessed be and may your joy be full. Thank you.